So given that we're all, thanks, Ian. Given that we're all familiar with the process, let's just do a little poll on the side around, you know, where people are at from a peak performance point of view, whether you're feeling in stride or not as in stride as what you would be. I mean, normally this group is pretty, you know, high up on that score, but just put in what you would say you are today. And yeah. It's good, Grant. 9.5. Great, Catherine. Judy's a 10, 9. These are very high scores. I got to say, this is the highest group that of all through the week for the different groups that we work with. This is the highest score by far of any team or group that we see. So I guess that's a nice sign in terms of people being, you know, this is what this is about. You know, is helping people understand themselves and being in stride, and not just for one moment in time. I often think about it like when I was a kid, we'd go to church every Sunday, you know, raised as a good Catholic, and everyone looks like they're the holy holies for an hour, and then you watch them in the car park straight afterwards and they're like running people over trying to get away, you know. And so I've often thought, what's the point of looking like when the self-awareness being like in stride and on your game for this 1 hour, and then the rest of the week is, you know, you're stressed or frustrated or whatever it might be. So hopefully we're not just like the churchgoers for 1 hour a week, you know, that we're more Christian and more in stride for the whole of the week. But these are very good scores.
It still happens in the car park, Paul.
Yeah, that's right. Same for me. I often sit there thinking, you know, what are the real stories going on with all of these people that are here today? Who's actually like bashing a wife or, you know, having an affair, or what's going on? You know, there's got to be more than what meets the eye. Anyway, these are good scores. So Joel, I'm glad to see your score up there as well. That you've been pretty consistently now back up there, you know, at a good energy score for you. That's great, mate. Has anyone got anything they want to comment on about their score? Either what they're doing to get there, or any forces pulling them, you know, out of stride that they're sort of fighting to stay there? Anything?
Yes, I would say, I was thinking I'm 9.5 because I just so much would rather just lie in bed till about 8. And so I go, no, I want to be on that call. So I'm up, showered, dressed, but in my stride, she says, oh, hell, who cares what day it is, what time it is? What do I feel like doing right now? So,
it's good when you're doing what you want to be doing.
yeah, but I want to be here, so.
That's good. That's good.
I might just comment a bit that speaking of the Catholic Church, I'm just discovering that there may have been a little hanky-panky between my uncle and my mother. And he was my godfather. And so it's been very funny. I'm not sad about it. I'm just, isn't this interesting? Because I left the Catholic Church a long time ago. And so.
Well, at the end of the day, it's full of humans, and humans are humans. You know, right. I think it comes down to your own relationship with your God and your own beliefs and principles, and staying true to them, Judy. That's, you know, there's a lot about various religions, I think, that are really so important. And at the end of the day, when you distill it all down, it's all about love, you know, loving yourself and loving each other and doing your best to do that each and every day. And any of the teachings are all along those lines, you know, so that's what we try and do here. Anyone else?
Hey, Paul, well, just a bit of it. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't jump in over anyone, did I?
No.
Okay, great. Just a bit of a family share. So we've sort of had our fair share of family stresses in the last couple of months. And one example that we had that actually ended in a really nice positive light as a result of ID. On Friday, it was the end of school over here for summer break. And just kind of impromptu. My wife and I wanted to take our kids out for a bit of a late lunch, early dinner, and celebrate, a bit of a milestone first year in the US, etc., out of the way. And for whatever reason, our two boys decided to, they weren't interested and had some real issues. And my eldest son, who's done his ID, Jack, he really let my wife down. And so I caught up with him and my younger son when she was out of the house, and I sort of explained how disappointed mum was and all the rest of it. And I wasn't sure if it really sunk in for him. Anyway, later that weekend, I was talking to my wife, and she was still pretty disappointed in him and pretty upset. And I said, well, let's think about his response from his ID perspective. I just had a quick look. He's a 4753. And so I said, he's an authenticator. He needs to hear it straight between the eyes. Like, you can't try and do the whole under the water, wishy-washy. So Mel's a 4637. But she just assumed he was going to get it. He's a 15-year-old boy going through puberty, just calls it how he sees it. And I said, so when you go back to have the conversation with him, think about it in terms of his ID. Strong authenticator. He just needs to hear it straight, but just be gentle. Like, you're obviously disappointed, but just don't flog the guts out of him. He needs to know that, we all make mistakes. And so that's exactly how she approached the conversation. She actually went at it knowing that he's an authenticator and that he wouldn't read between the lines like someone like me. And I walked in an hour later, and the two of them were having a big old laugh and talking about plans, and it was just a really nice outcome. But nice. Using ID to kind of break it down and understand how to approach the challenge.
Thanks for sharing that, Grant. Yeah, it's so valuable, isn't it? And when you can do it even in your own family, what's more important than that? So important. So all those little nuances, like given this is the masterclass. So we were talking yesterday, so Susie's son is 14, he's a completer. And whether he gets the early train or the later train, one gets him to school, right on the bell, and the other one gets him to school like with 20 minutes to spare. And I said to Susie, the 20-minute to spare bit is always important, because if a completer feels ahead of the game, it just changes his whole day. And she said, oh my God, the text messages that she was getting from him, because he got there early, but it was just having that room to move. So there's subtle little differences. They just play out all the time, So yeah, every day. You remind me of a time. So Mitchell, my son, when he was 6, he got diagnosed with leukemia. And we knew he was an authenticator back then. He hadn't done his ID, but all the signals were that he was an authenticator. And I remember saying to his mum, Lynn, at the time, okay, we know his ID. We owe it to him to be really straight and just tell him the truth, right? And I went in to see him the next morning after we'd had the diagnosis, and I said, Mitch, we found out what it is. And he just looked at me and he goes, so Dad, am I going to die? That was the first question. And I remember thinking, you little shit, I was going to, like me, but I was going to work up to it. And, and he just like that classic authenticate, cut the crap, and I just said to him, probably, but we're going to do all we can to beat it. And you've got to stay strong. And the next day I went in, he was in tears, and I thought, oh, it's finally hit him, and we'll have to deal with it. And I said, what's going on, buddy? And he goes, well, you told me I've got to stay strong, but how can I stay strong if I can't get out of here to exercise?
Oh.
He was 6. So it just gave us a lot of, humor, obviously, but it was just, even then we had this straight up relationship with him as a 6-year-old. I remember thinking, talk to him as if he was an adult. So I would, in my being number one in Authenticate, it would make me sort of be really direct with him. And it totally worked. It just really, in fact, the doctors commented on what a difference it made. They didn't know what we were doing, but they just said, you have a very different style of communication where it seems to be working for him, But anyway, yeah, I think Jay said to me one time, Dad, do you think about our IDs when you're parenting us? And I said, every breath I take, like it never leaves my mind. And everything I say or do, I'm always thinking, one of them's an improviser, well, the other 3 are completers and authenticator, and just how I regulate it. And that doesn't mean it's perfect. I mean, the big difference between me and my kids is I'm an 8 and authenticate, and they're not. You know, Laura's a 7, but the other 3 are all avoid, and I'm very aware of how that can come across. You know, that sense of judgment or blame, and ever since, in fact, Catherine, I mentioned it to you on a few calls ago. There was a time when Catherine and I had a little exchange where I just even thought about some feedback I was going to give, and that landed the wrong way. Just the fact I took time to think. You know, like I've never forgotten those types of examples and how they play out amongst family relationships. So yeah, I would encourage all of you to, firstly, if you've got people that have not yet done their ID, just get them to do it. But the more you can talk about it, you become so much more aware yourself, you know, like self-aware from the feedback you get from them. But it's hugely beneficial. I sort of feel like, what's the point in going out talking to everyone else about being your best if firstly you're not there, and secondly your family's not there? Like, we might as well pack up and go home, you know. So important to put that into practice. Okay, so in terms of things on people's minds, has anyone got something like a problem you want to share, or a challenge that you're facing that you'd like to get the benefit of the brainstorming of the team to talk through how you might approach it? That is the you know, the purpose of this class, the masterclass, to really leverage each other's respective experiences and ID brains to, you know, solve problems together.
Well, could I just ask you, I actually had listened to an interview, and it was about diversity and inclusion. And one of the questions that came up was understanding how we've all got our differences, but really what are our similarities. Mm-hmm. And I thought of us all joining together, you know, in our ID masterclass. And even though we're always looking at how we're different, what's unique about us, etc., but what is it that's really similar in terms of what's bringing us together? So I just thought I'd mention that. So I thought it was a good question in terms of, yeah, organisations and how they're operating when they're trying to introduce diversity and inclusion.
It's a great question. It's a bit like how everyone always focuses on their weaknesses and not on their strengths. You know,
yes, yeah.
The real value is going to come from leveraging your strengths, not trying to improve a weakness. I think be aware of them, and especially their impact on others. But you know, all of the research and all of the conversations I've ever had with successful people is that they're like orders of magnitude more successful by leveraging their strengths than what they've ever achieved by focusing on trying to fix things up about themselves. So assuming the same principle applies here, what comes to mind, Susan, for the whole point around similarities?
Well, I just heard it an hour ago, so I'm still processing, but I just thought it was such a good question, because in a sense we're all here to, well, I don't know what everyone else is here for, but I'm here to learn personal development. I'm here to learn how to understand communication leadership styles with everyone who's, you know, what their uniqueness is. So that's as far as I've got with it. But I think in terms of an organisation, if you're trying to, I'm just thinking out loud now, I'm talking, if you're trying to understand their uniqueness, their strengths, as you say, but what's kind of underpinning all that? Why are we all here? Like, and that's why I just thought of the ID community. What's similar about us rather than what's different? Because the difference or the uniqueness can create like a separateness in a sense, rather than bringing everyone together. So what's bringing us all together?
So, Susan, I'm remembering in my training organisation, I was asked in the late 90s, in the noughties, to author a program for Crown in Melbourne to help them work with their non-Australian clientele and to help their staff understand multicultural differences or cultural differences, so that the patrons were treated with warmth and welcome and not with judgment, like spitting on the floor was getting to be a problem. and older ladies pushing into line, or older men pushing into line, but mostly older ladies, you know, because the auntie was allowed to do that. And that's the program was focused on, you know, what is in common. And I think one of the early exercises on the first day was, you know, stand up with someone you work with or don't work with, it doesn't matter. Now count the number of things that are different about you, and now count the number of things that are the same. And it was just such a very simple thing. But the feedback from the managers afterwards was that the team, the management team, changed their attitude, their responses, their feeling for each other enormously. And I just thought it was a very simple thing to do. But apparently it was massively impactful. And the other thing that occurs to me listening to you talk, and it's so good to be reminded of this, is that my big joy in the ID system is discovering that I'm not broken, that there is nothing wrong with me and I don't need fixing. Because, you know, Paul will tell you I flatlined on my first response. And when I got my profile, I was so horrified with the judgment of myself, because it was so different to what I'd been brought up that good girls did. And the joy has been reminding myself how the fact I'm not broken, nobody is, and nobody needs fixing. And yet there is so much work and so much, you know, my behavior needs evolution, and I need continual understanding and the growth in that. But as an individual, I'm not broken is so joyful.
So that's like perhaps a commonality. It'd be interesting to understand like what the threads are, you know, that we're not broken, that, you know, we don't have to judge ourselves or whatever it is. It'd be just interesting. I know, it just sparked a big question in my mind, and I just thought I'd mention it. Yeah.
So before we dig a little deeper into that question, Susan, can I just ask, so from a timing point of view, I know we do the right thing by everybody. Does anyone else have anything else on their mind they'd like to, you know, ask of the group? Just a challenge or something I'd like to put up. Laura.
Hi there. Sorry I was late today. I think it's a great question, and when I'm here in these sessions, I'm always looking for similarities. I think there's some comfort in knowing that there's other people out there like me. I'm not the only one, and that's what ID is partly brought to me. Is I'm always searching for, you know, similar, you know, numbers and whatnot. But the biggest thing is that each of us plays a really important part. And I mean, I didn't really get that until I got here and started seeing how each of us plays a really super important part to the big picture. And I've always had my head down, always in the detail, and I never really understood how I fit in and how desperately I need other people and their differences in order to have some success in whatever we're doing. And so that's what's really cool about it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. It's really good. Anyone else got something on their mind they'd like to share with, like ask a challenge they want to put up? Lisa.
Yeah, I was just listening to the earlier comments about talking to someone with an ID who you know is an authenticator, and knowing that you have to speak very plainly to them. We've got a little bit of an issue in the family in the next coming weeks, but it's extended family, so it's my sister and brother-in-law, and I don't know their IDs, so I haven't sort of done that with them. I mean, I've lived with them all my life, but I don't really know how best to communicate with them when it's something that it's news that I don't think they want to hear. So there's a family milestone birthday coming up. My brother-in-law's turning 50, but we've got a lot of other things happening in the background here, and it's meant that it's going to be a real challenge for me to attend. So they're in Coffs Harbour, so they're a 6-hour drive away, although we tend to do that a lot more slowly, and seems to take us like 2 days to get there. We stop for coffee and, you know, chats along the way, but working out how to break that news to her, that the whole family are not likely to attend, was really hard for me to, without knowing her idea about how to break that gently to her, or whether or not, because I just wanted to tell her straight because that's what worked for me. But being aware of my audience, I didn't necessarily think that that was going to go down very well. So without knowing someone else's ID in terms of communicating something, if it's, you know, particularly bad news that you were talking about, you know, with your son, it was great that you knew how to do that well. How do you go about doing that when it's someone that you don't know their ID?
Great question. And we'll dig into that for you in a little bit. We'll come back to that one. And does anyone else have anything that they'd like to raise? Okay, things might come up from the conversation. So let's talk first of all about your point, Susan, around similarities. You know, so I'm really interested to sort of unpack this with you as well, and with the team, because the first thing that occurred to me was that we have a lot of similarities maybe in our values, and therefore the differences might be in ID. But when you think of it in a team, even in a team, you can have similarities of similarities of values, and you can have misalignment of values too, you know. So it's not necessarily that values is where we're similar and IDs are where we're different, because we could have similarities in IDs. I've just looked at the ID of this group, and it doesn't really play out because we've got a wide variety of IDs. But I'm curious as to whether people have got something, maybe a perspective that I'm not seeing, that could be really interesting in terms of what our similarities are. Are they more around our values, or do you see similarities around our IDs or around our values around ID? Just curious.
I thought for me, it's maybe some frustrations. I know definitely Amanda and I reached a point in our, I mean, we love each other very much, and you know, but we're so different from each other, and definitely we couldn't quite figure out why, because the thing that brought us together and keeps us together are our values. But then there's so many other things, aspects to who we are, that are completely opposite to each other.
Today, I couldn't get through on that. The empty bottle.
Gail, you might just go. Yeah. Thanks, John.
Yeah, no, all good. Yeah, and so for me, it was kind of this frustration of kind of not really. And the thing is, as an avoid authenticator, I wasn't really asking the question why I was frustrated. It wasn't until it was sort of put on through our business coach Savas. He was kind of, you know, explained to us about ID and about some our personalities and things like that. And then you started to go, oh, right, oh, that's why. You know, and I think having the value in place to actually want to understand other people, and actually, you know, not going, well, this is just the way I am, so kind of deal with it. It's more like, okay, well, how can I be a little bit more amiable and understand other people, and to help them understand me a bit better. And it just seemed that everyone seems to have that same kind of goal. It's always like, it's not like, why can't everybody just do, you know, accept me? It's like, how can I understand other people and deal with other people? And that's probably one of the things I hear a lot.
Yeah, I think that's really, really well said. You know, when I think about why we came to these classes and keep coming, you know, clearly there's something in there about being the best version of ourselves. You know, we're trying to learn things to be our very best version of ourselves. But there is something about wanting to understand others that, you know, when you can hear from other people who are normal, good-hearted people, that we're all, you know, there's no judgment here. So you look at someone else's perspective and it's so different to what we might be each thinking. And you go, my God, it's so helpful to hear that and hear it from someone you're not as emotionally connected to. So it's a bit safer, you know. No one's, you know, trying to serve a particular agenda other than just speaking authentically. So I can see it. There's a couple of values that we really do share across the board that keep people coming back. Do others see other values that may be true for you or what you perceive in the group as to what pulls us together and what the similarities are?
I think we're continual inquirers, and we want to keep learning. That's the whole ethos, obviously, of the class. We want to keep learning for ourselves and for the others in the world. And that's part of the wanting to be the best people we can be. But it's got a slight nuance in that it takes a lot of humility. Well, it takes some humility to say, you know, I don't know how you think. I don't know the right answer. I want to know more. And it is that with love as its focus, but it is a behavior that evidences humility and the longing to learn and understand more, so we can be of more service and more value.
That's good. Thanks, Catherine.
Can I add to that, Gail? The thing I find is when I finish these sessions, I'm so calm, so relaxed. I'm not an early morning person. So for me, doing anything at 8 a.m. is early. And yet I do it every week because I learn all this stuff. I meet all these amazing people. And I feel so good afterwards. But when I distill it down, I realize that very often when I'm in a group of people that I may or may not know, because my idea is slightly out there, I sometimes feel I have to temper what I want to say so I'm not judged. And in here, it doesn't matter. And I think that that's just such a big difference about this group and why I come each time. So I think that there's a whole lot of things ranging from emotional to values to understanding that cause people to keep coming back here each week.
That's really cool. I'm glad it's doing that for you, Gail.
If I may backmark what Joel said, and you sort of reiterated it, Paul, and it's something that we sort of, if I can put it in different terms, if you will, it's that the basic thing that we all have in common is that we're taking the time and putting the effort in to do things deliberately. We're developing our self-awareness, and we're living deliberately. We're making the choices deliberately of how we communicate, how we reach out. And the other really good thing that I've learned from here and that I see all of us doing is that we don't just look at ourselves. We don't look internally. We look out, and we look at how the other person's feeling and how they're reacting, and we try to work with them. And that's the big plus that I always take away from this and try to apply is, how can I live more deliberately, and how can I better understand that environment that all those humans around me are creating, so that it benefits all of us. And I believe I've become a better listener and a bit more attentive to those nuances that I usually expect black and white, just give me the answer. So it's definitely helped me, and I can see it's helped all of us. So I think that's the thing that brings us all together, Susan. And that's, I think we put that into the bucket of values. But ultimately it's within this group, it's about trying to work together the best, looking for the positives and the strengths rather than focusing on ourselves and weaknesses in others.
Thanks, Jose.
One thing I really enjoy is being with a group of like-minded people who are on this journey. Like, that's something that is really important to me. And also the other thing I just thought of then is compassion, in terms of understanding, you know, myself as well as others. Like, the compassion piece comes up as well. So
it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, so many of us have never actually met each other in real life, and yet a sense of awareness and friendship and so on, but definitely an acceptance. I think there is a safety in this group that people do feel they can speak their truth, and it's okay, you know, that they're, in fact, not only just okay, but it's people are curious about it, like they want to learn more, and it provides something that's a different perspective to where they may have been at, so that makes it rich in, you know, in the conversation. I think it is interesting. It's a great question you've asked, Susan, to sort of understand not just why people, it's not really why they come, it's more why they keep coming, you know, because there's all sorts of reasons why people might come. But if you look at that in a team and even in a family context, like Grant, you were just saying before, you know, kids are doing things at one phase of their life because of obedience, you know, and then they start to, as we say, a teenager, they start to get the mind of their own, you know, and now they need a different motivation. And so even understanding what is it that's going to tie our family together, like if we're going to rally around our similarities, what are those similarities that are going to tie us together and have us stay strong and bonded together as we go forward, you know. It's really interesting. I remember I've never been attracted to doing like a family tree, you know, like it doesn't, I got a brother that's into all that stuff. So I sort of figure that he'll take care of that. And I don't know, you know, other than knowing sort of the immediate sphere of my family, I'm pretty dumb when it comes to all the connection points. And my mum was really big on, I'd say so-and-so is a cousin. She goes, well, he's actually a third cousin twice removed, or what. And I think it just did my head in to sort of understand all of those possible connections. But you know, I have thought about the fact that the legacy that I could leave my children, one of the legacies would be, what are the cultural values or the family values that tie us together as a family? Like, what are the things that make the Burgess family, you know? And writing that up is almost like not my guidance for my family, but just capturing the things that you may not even realize. There's things we do that you don't realize at the time how valuable they are until you stop doing them, or someone goes away overseas, so you stop them and you realize what a difference it makes to the family. And I remember, like, we say grace before meals, and when the family, and I know the kids, they got to an age where they're like, oh, seriously, we've got to do that again, you know? And yet when they come back now, the first thing I do when we sit down to have a meal is they all hold hands and they're just waiting for someone to say grace. Like, it's just a really, and I've joked about it, and they're like, well, that's what we do, Dad, as a fan. That's our thing, you know? And that's just one example that comes to mind, but there are others as well that I think capturing what they are and keeping them alive in our families is a bit like what we're talking about here, you know, like, what are the similarities that bind us? And we could look at that for our families, for our relationship, you know, for work teams and so on. I think we could extrapolate this message out to a whole range of sort of groups in our individual ecosystems. Great question. So with that, we might just move on to the next topic that you raised, Lisa, around how do we raise issues with people when we don't know their IDs? And there are times when you can, whilst I would say to you, I have not, even with my knowledge of the ID, having developed it, I can't guess someone's ID. I can't say to you that they're a verifier completer or an improvised, you know, like a 4, 6, 3, 7, but but I think there are times when different individuals can show you a particular instinct. So you might sort of pick up, boy, they've got to be a verifier, you know, or they've got to be an improviser. You might pick up one trait. The other thing that I watch for is whether people look in stride or out of stride, because how people are likely to react has a lot to do with whether they're in stride or out of stride. So you talk about raising something with your sister, but let's just use ourselves as an example. If you're in a good place and you're like a 10 out of 10 on the peak performance scale, and someone raises an issue with you, you're going to react very differently to if you're a 3 out of 10. So whilst we don't know what's behind someone being out of stride, their behavior is often indicative of them being out of stride. And when I say their behavior, if they're coming across sort of negatively, they've got a victim mindset, or their health's not good, you know, they're good clues that someone's not on their best game and might be a little more sensitive than others. So in terms of what I would watch for, I watch for those couple of things. You know, are there any clues I get around one particular strong instinct that I can play to? Because what I've found with ID is you don't need to be like bang on. And like if I'm talking to you as a 4-6-3-7, I don't need to have a strategy for a 4-6-3-7. I just got to have something for the 7 or something for the 3 or something for the 6 or like just one little piece that can, where you feel a connection is often enough for that empathy to bring us together and create the thing that makes it safer for us to keep, you know, talking in a really constructive way. We don't need to be like rocket scientists about it and be really on the money. We just got to be sort of approximate almost. So even if you've only got a clue as to one instinct, I think that's still helpful. And if you don't have any of those clues, and there are times when, you know, you sort of think, God, I've got no idea where that person's coming from, which might also be the same for that individual too, you know. I would start from a place of firstly making sure your heart's in the right place. Like, where are you coming from? Are you in stride? Are you coming from a good and loving, courageous place? And then the key is need. If you use the word need, like what does someone need to deal with this? I found need to be like a universal word that opens up a conversation. And particularly me being a verifier, I'm very conscious of not coming up with the answer all the time. So take with your sister, instead of telling her the answer, which might be we can't all come to the event, what if you just shared the problem and let her be part of the solving of it? And this may not work for your sister, but you know, if you just, because my issue as a verifier is, well, I figured it all out and I can see that we're not going to be able to come. So I've got to ring you and tell you the bad news, you know. But if I backtracked it and sort of said, oh my God, I'd love to come. You know, I don't know what to do here because I really want to be there, but I've also got this other challenge. But I don't want to let you down. And you're just sort of putting all the problems on the table. It could well be that she turns around and says, oh my God, no problem. Like, we'll just change the date. Or, you know, we'll come to, but often they'll come up with solutions that you wouldn't have gone there because you think it's, you know, be too much of an ask. But they will come up with answers that, you know, might be left field, but they might work. So, and I'm not trying to solve this all on my own for you. I just wanted to throw in some ideas to maybe provoke a conversation that the rest of the group can share as well on how might you do things if you don't know someone's ID. I would say, you know, working backwards, don't try and solve it all yourself. I think that's a really key piece. You know, when people feel a connection that you want to solve it with them, like you want to be at their party, you want to, you know, you want the goodness for them, but you're just feeling stuck with the answer, I think that provokes a very different response from them. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what the group thinks.
Can I ask a question going backwards? With that event where the wife had organized a party and the kids said, nah, I'd rather do something else, you know, because they're kids. The outcome of that was more about repairing relationships, wasn't it? Rather than whether or not everyone was then forced to go to the party or not go to the party. So it was more about how to manage the fallout from not achieving the party. Is that's correct, isn't it?
Grant, I think Jose is referring to your situation.
Yeah, spot on, Jose. So to be honest, the going out for dinner was just an enabler for the situation. So there was stuff brewing in the background, and the desire to impromptu go out for dinner was kind of catalyst to get all this stuff to the surface, and then used ID to kind of work our way through. Oh, actually, my wife worked her way through it with our eldest son. So absolutely, Jose, it wasn't the dinner per se. It was very much around working through some of these things that were brewing in the background.
But Grant, did Jack end up coming out for dinner? Did you go out for dinner with him? Or
So
not?
we didn't on that day. My wife was fairly upset about the whole thing and just didn't feel like going out. We ended up doing something completely different as a family on the Sunday. Went and saw a movie, actually. That's what we did. Just reminded me.
Right.
First time we've been to a movie as a family in probably 18 months.
Yep.
So I guess that's where I'm sort of going, that this is more about how to do that interaction and the fallout, rather than whether or not you're going to attend the birthday sort of thing.
Yep, correct.
Yeah. So Lisa, have you had the conversation with your sister yet?
Yeah, I did give her a call just to sort of preemptively gauge where she was at, and you're right, she's probably already not in stride, because she's, you know, responsible for a lot of the sort of party planning aspects, and she's already starting to get stressed. So and at the time that I called her, she was out at the shops getting things, and so I sort of didn't potentially choose a good time either to do that, because there are some health challenges in the background as well for her, and but interestingly, I actually thought that that might have maybe made her a little bit more receptive, because there's been some other events this year that she wasn't able to attend because her health wasn't good. So I was hoping that she would have that empathy for our situation, but it just seemed to frustrate her even more, I think. So I think potentially what has it, I'm not going to be able to salvage the here and now of the coming up to the event. It's just going to be about getting a good resolution of the fallout of it with respect to ID, and just piece it together after the fact. I was trying to have it all nice and rosy and before it occurred, but yeah, I'm just going to have to sort of have a chat about that. I just I was hoping that potentially she would come up with a solution, like, you know, we'll just do a video call, or, you know, there'll be something, and we haven't really gotten to a resolution as yet, but yeah, so it's a tricky one. But yeah, I think that's what I'm going to end up having to do, or just keep revisiting it between now and then, and just sort of gauge how she's feeling about things, and if I can tell she's, you know, more in stride on a particular day, open up a little bit more. But just, yeah, maybe recognize when she's not in a good place, that's probably not a good time to go into the ins and outs of, you know, whether we're coming or how it could work or anything like that, and just be mindful of where she's at. That's probably better.
You know, it occurs to me listening to you that there might be some people, you know, where no matter what approach you take, and even if you knew her ID, nothing's going to land, you know. And so really all we can do is take care of how we show up. And and it's thing going to land where it's going to land, you know. There's times when I think many people have had this sort of experience where, for all of your best of intentions, no matter what you say or do, it doesn't land well for the other person in that moment. And later they'll come back to you and say, you know what, I owe you an apology with the way I reacted. It wasn't, you know, it had nothing to do with you. I wasn't in a good place, you know, yada, yada, yada. And so as you know, I've learnt more, I guess, just being more aware of, am I in stride? Am I showing up with the best of intentions and a loving and courageous heart and speaking my truth, and then it will land where it's going to land, you know. And that, even for them, it may be somewhat destructive, but only in the sense of, I use that meaning as part of a transformation. Like if it causes a friction, maybe the friction is going to lead to something that's really positive anyway. So, but it was a necessary step in that process. So maybe that's, rather than worrying about what everyone else thinks and how they're going to react. And like you said, you're even, you know, not being true to yourself, in the sense that if you were just going to do it your way, you just lay it out there because that's your ID, is a straight shooting sort of ID. So when you're holding back on you, it's probably not going to work anyway. And if you just sort of said to her and share all of you, which is not just, you know, I can't come. It's like, I'm actually really nervous. Like I would suggest sharing all of you is sharing the most vulnerable you, the most authentic you, which is, you know, honestly, what's your sister's name?
Karen.
Karen. So if you say, Karen, I want to talk to you, but honestly, I'm really nervous to have this conversation with you, you know, because I don't want to upset you, and I'm scared for how you're going to react, and I don't want it to damage our relationship, because I love you to death. But, you know, like, speak all of your truth, not just part of your truth, but share the most vulnerable, authentic truth. And I think when you share about how you're feeling for the other person, it really disarms them, and you've got the greatest chance of helping them meet you where you want them to meet you.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good. Yeah, I feel much better about it at the moment.
Can I throw in what I'm seeing here, because I'm looking at it from a detached kind of perspective, is that this may be a bit of what we refer to as like the onion skins, where the new strategy, the new perspective, the thing you walk away from the class is, in a situation where you don't know the other person's ID, it's a difficult conversation to be had. The ideal thing would be to be your very best. Be the best that you can be, and hopefully that'll inspire a positive, and it'll land where it'll land. But I think that what probably was going on, because you've got history with your sister, you know, lived with her for a long time, you know her, is that you were falling back into those onion skins that you had before of, this is the way I have to behave to communicate with her, because that's the history we have. This is how I know her. This is how and so it's kind of like going backwards, if you will, into the norm of behavior, which has got you where you are now, but may not be getting you where you want to be, if you know what I mean.
Does anyone else have any approaches that they've found helpful to them when they're trying to deal with sensitive issues with people where you don't know their ID? Has anyone got a particular approach they'd like to share?
I've got an experience I can share, which is similar to, I guess, what you were talking about earlier about just approaching the people with a problem and sort of saying, well, this is what it is. How do I deal with it? It was something that happened to my wife. She was invited to go over to Ireland to do a like a ceremony for orphans. You know, she was one of those famine orphans that her ancestors were famine orphan that came out of Ireland. And she was invited as a guest speaker, and the dates that they had didn't work for her because she was at school and she couldn't get the time off. So she just emailed back and said, I can't come on those dates, but I can come after this date. So they changed the date. So it's amazing sometimes when you let people know what the issues are, how much, like, what they'll do to accommodate you. So, and it doesn't always work that way, but I guess being open and transparent seems to work. Yeah. So that's it.
Thanks, Richard.
I have the keywords, the handout that you created with the keywords on it. I've printed out and have it at the back of my portfolio that I usually take with me everywhere and scribble on it. And I have a friend who is in deep discomfort, and at the moment, just in her life. And I must not prescribe. I cannot prescribe. I can only listen. And listening to her and then coming home yesterday afternoon and looking at the keywords printout helped me to understand a lot. And I just am going to make some suggestions today that might be helpful. So I found that keywords document is just so useful for going, oh yes, I heard that. She's always been really cross at me that I don't embrace her passionate need for harmony. And I don't, because I like challenge. That's the only way I get to learn. If I sit in harmony, then everything stays the same. And it's only when I'm willing to be provoked within myself. The Buckminster Fuller word has left my mind for the moment. But it's that stimulation that says, oh no, there's something here I don't get. And I want that so I can keep learning. And she does not. And she's been very judgmental around my rejection of harmony. She thinks it's ridiculous. So even looking at that yesterday, I went, of course. Yeah, you know, that's it. There quite possibly is a strong completer drive. And I have almost none. So yeah, I'm finding that's helping.
Have you seen that slide, Lisa, the one that Catherine's referring to? Have you seen that slide?
No, I was just flicking through what I had on hand, and what I have is just, I don't know what I've just done there.
Can you see it now?
You've done that. There you go. Okay, no, I don't have that.
Okay.
I've got vulnerabilities, needs, and talents, but I haven't seen that one.
This slide might be either take a screenshot or we can send it to you. But what they do, and what Catherine's referring to, is after the fact, you might, you know, like me, now that you at least know your sister, you might look and sort of say, is there a category here that seems to represent her? Like, does she use some of these words? Or when you think about, is there one direction? Don't try and guess the whole idea, just one directions that you think that really stands out. And then I'd say to you, just try it. You know, like if you think she's a strong completer or a strong avoid improviser or whatever it might be, just try it and just sort of go, well, if you've got a 1 in 4 chance of it being right, you know, and by the 4th time you probably figure it out. You know, it won't take very long. That's if I was working with someone and I knew I had the chance to work with them on several occasions, I also think of a trial and error approach that, you know, it very, very quickly through a few conversations, I'll get a sense of which instinct starts to push the right buttons for them. Yeah.
No, that looks really helpful. Yeah, I probably need to. Is that on the website, Paul, or are they?
Yeah, it is. In fact, it was sent out with either last week or the week before. Ian, can you just make sure that gets to
noted?
Yeah, thank
you. It did? Okay. All right, I'll download it. Thank you.
I'll send it to you separately, Lisa, anyway, just so you've got it to hand. So
thank you. Yeah, it's very good. Looks good. Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we all face it. I mean, but I mean, I've had people where I've sat next to them on a plane, and the minute they're sat down, I've got a sense of a strong instinct, you know, just from something they've said or something that they were wearing. You know, you see different clues. But for those times where you don't know, I would just say, above all else, put the focus on how you show up and make sure you're coming from the right place. But share all of you, and I think the more you share your feelings around these things, particularly sensitive topics, so people can connect with you that way, I think that's it's a good place to start. Because I have a saying that says vulnerability builds rapport. And I've never, ever seen it backfire, ever. Even when, you know, someone is sharing something, you think that would be so embarrassing to share that. it's never, ever backfired, as long as they're coming from a place of real authenticity when they share their vulnerability. People always want to connect. It's like a magnet for people. So if you share your own vulnerability, in real authentic, from a place of real authenticity, you might be really surprised with how she reacts, and if she doesn't, you've still done the best thing you could do. And it may just be that she's on her own journey, and it'll take her some time to catch up and, have a cleaner, honest conversation with you. But at least you've done the best you could do at the time.
I'm wondering, I have a structure around conversations that sort of sits in very much in the background for me, but I think it can be applied equally, using whatever ID. And that is really to start with intention, to be clear about sharing your intention at the beginning, and intention of the conversation, but also intention, on all those sorts of levels, including feelings. But then build connection. So something that builds, something connects, and then listen. And then work out, what does this mean? So it's the reflection bit for you. Well, what have I really listened to? What have they not said? What have they said? How have they said it? What does that mean now to me? And then some shared knowledge. And then what do we do? Whether we do nothing or whatever. So, and I'd be interested in this conversation for another time, given we're short on time. But, is it interesting, given my ID, how when I've tried to unpack how I do something, is it surprising that, or not surprising that I've come up with a sort of structure? And I'm not conscious of this, but I've had to try and unpack how I can make a structure useful. Here we go, or then useful for people. But I think this is useful in the way I think about things.
Has it been helpful to you, Leonie?
Yes, I think it is. I tend to think of it as, again, authenticate, as building scaffolding. You put up a scaffold so you can move up and down, up and through a conversation. This is a scaffolding. If a conversation's not going well, where do you need to go back to? Did they misunderstand the intention? Have you lost the connection? Have you just not listened enough? You move up and down as you need it. So, I think it is helpful, but it's probably not front of mind. It's probably more comes naturally.
Hey, Leonie, it's really scary how you've described exactly what I do.
Wow, isn't that interesting?
With the similarities, yeah, very. Well, it's maybe something we can explore next time we're together, at another class, is to maybe put some sort of framework around this that might be helpful to all of us who, encounter these same situations from time to time, just so that we've got at least a way of getting started, so that firstly, we don't procrastinate on it, and secondly, we do the best job we can for ourselves and for the people that we care about, so maybe it's a good topic to explore, and we can, maybe you could bring that framework to the meeting, Leonie, so we can talk it through.
Yeah, great.
Guys, we're out of time. Thanks again for being here today and for the sharing. It's always so honest and real, and always inspiring to me, and I'm sure to each of you as well. That's why we're coming back. It was great to hear what some of those similarities actually are, and I appreciate that in all of you. So thank you for being here. Have a wonderful week, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks again. Thanks, everyone.